Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. And I thought, of course, that I would give my little fight review of the Joseph Parker versus Derek Chisora fight, the rematch, of course. Now, for those of us that had the privilege and the joy of watching the first fight, I believe it was earlier this year. I think maybe the first fight was around June or July, but I can't necessarily remember. But maybe someone correct me if I'm wrong there. Could have been a little bit earlier, could have been a little bit later. But of course, that fight was very decently competitive, and I thought that the fight could have potentially went either way for that fight, at least heading into the matchup. And then, of course, even after the matchup had ended, it was a split decision victory for Joseph Parker. So Joseph Parker, of course, ended up getting the victory. However, he did win by the skin of his teeth, and he got very, very lucky in that performance over Derek Chisora because he could have easily lost that fight as well. But I do have to give Joseph Parker a hell of a lot of credit overall, especially in this rematch because he ended up winning this, I don't want to say with complete ease, but he did end up making some massive adjustments in this fight, or at least to the degree to where he was able to completely beat up Derek Chisora in this fight. Now, Derek Chisora, in my opinion, he's not really someone that has ever been an A-grade fighter. I'm not even sure if you rank him as a class of B, but he is someone that is going to give you hell, especially if you're not that upper echelon of fighter like an A-grade fighter. And in my opinion, Joseph Parker, and I know a certain amount of the Joseph Parker fans, they're a big fan of mine. And I say that sarcastically because the Joseph Parker fans, they've never been a big fan of my assessment of him. It just is what it is. Joseph Parker, in my opinion, I think that he's a very talented athlete. I think that he has very good hand speed for the division. He does have decent punching power. He can hurt you with one shot, although I don't know if I would compare his punching power necessarily quite on the same level as, say, an Anthony Joshua or Deontay Wilder, of course, but he does have very, very decent punching power. I think that Joseph Parker, of course, he is one of the all-around more talented athletes in the division. And I thought that he put on a very impressive performance. I thought that, especially coming off of a very tough fight against Derek Chisora, it could have been very easy for Joseph Parker to possibly mentally fold in that fight and maybe fight a little bit more stupid. And maybe, now, there were certain times in this fight that I thought Joseph Parker could have fought more intelligently. I think that Joseph Parker tends to be a little bit better on the back foot. He can fight a little bit on the inside, but Joseph Parker, because especially he's not necessarily A grade in terms of defensive responsibility, he can get into trouble when getting hit in exchanges, meaning that he can be knocked down, he can be hurt, he can be punched. So Joseph Parker, in my opinion, I don't see a completely new and improved fighter overall compared to when I first seen him, like against Carlos Takam or Andrew Wiese Jr., but I do think all in all that this is the best performance that he has had in a few years. Now, in terms of Derek Chisora, I believe that Derek Chisora in this fight, to be honest with you, at least in terms of a long time, this is probably the worst that I've ever seen him look. Now, maybe it was just a strategy, or maybe all in all it was because Joseph Parker, maybe it was because he was so quick and a little bit more defensive in this fight, and maybe he took him a little bit more seriously this time, and maybe he was just able to hit him a little bit early and hurt him, and it threw Derek Chisora, off. I'm not necessarily sure. But to be quite honest with you, when we just take a look at Derek Chisora, he is 37 years of age. And Derek Chisora, he is a person that he's been in a lot of wars. He's fought Tyson Fury twice. He's fought David Haye. He's fought Alexander Usyk. He's fought Joseph Parker twice. He's fought Carlos Takam. He's fought a multitude of other fighters that maybe I'm not even personally remembering at the current moment in time. Kubrat Pulev, that's another one that he fought recently. Derek Chisora, in my opinion, after this fight, or maybe after one more fight, maybe he should have one more showcase fight against a very tough fighter. Maybe if he wants to go after one more decently big fight against a top contender, maybe if he wants to do that, go ahead. But Derek Chisora, this dude has taken so much damage in his career, and the way that he looked in this fight, I don't want to necessarily say that he looked lethargic. I'm not trying to strip away credit from Joseph Parker, but like I said, this Derek Chisora, this guy looked, this guy overall looked, I mean, borderline lethargic in this fight. Now, he looked overall kind of like the regular Chisora, going in, trying to brawl with you on the inside, trying to make you uncomfortable, throwing hooks first, not really a whole bunch of straight punches all the time. This looked like somewhat of the regular Derek Chisora, but he looked even in worse condition, in my opinion, in this fight than possibly some of his other ones. And in my opinion, I think that the age and I think that the damage is starting to catch up with him a little bit because Joseph Parker, at least in certain rounds to where, he made it, kind of on purposely more competitive. I think that Joseph Parker, I think that he easily won this fight. The first fight I thought could have went either way. I would have to rewatch it. I think I scored it slightly for Joseph Parker. But in this fight, I think all in all that Joseph Parker clearly won the fight. I don't even think it was that close. I think maybe one of the scorecards were close, but if you really know what you're watching, Joseph Parker, I thought that he won this fight very clearly. I thought that he won this fight probably about 9 rounds to 3, possibly even 10 rounds to 2, if you wanted to score it that way. So it was somewhere around there. There may be some people that give Derek Chisora about 4 rounds, but not personally for me. I think that personally that would be a little bit too much for Derek Chisora. Now, in terms of Joseph Parker, where do I think overall that this will lead him? Well, in my opinion, it's very hard to say. Because like I said, Joseph Parker, in my opinion, in the first place, I don't think that he's really ever been an A-plus heavyweight to begin with. And a certain amount of people, of course, are going to disagree with that, but it just is what it is. I never thought that he was on the same level as an Anthony Joshua. I never thought that he was on the same level overall as a Deontay Wilder. Now, in terms of skills, does Joseph Parker have Deontay Wilder beat in certain categories? Yes, he does, but I'm not just talking about skills. I'm talking about someone that could debatably be the unified heavyweight champion of the world. And in my opinion, when we talk about fighters that have that ability, there's only 4 heavyweights, in my opinion, of really the past several years that really are only going to have that opportunity. And I'm not counting Vladimir Klitschko because his time was a little bit before then. So one would be Anthony Joshua, in my opinion. And this is in no particular order in terms of skills or who I think is the greatest, but I'm just listing them off. Anthony Joshua would have to be in the upper echelon. Now, Alexander Usyk would have to be in the upper echelon. Deontay Wilder, I think, was in the upper echelon because of his power and because of how talented an athlete that he was in terms of his reach and also his height. And of course, Tyson Fury has to be in that upper echelon as well, probably as the greatest heavyweight of this era, at least until he possibly loses. Those, in my opinion, are the heavyweights that are in the upper echelon. Below them, you have other heavyweights that they may be able to win a title. They may possibly be able to beat one of the A-grade fighters, but they're probably not going to do it consistently. And more than likely, if they were to have a rematch against the guys, more than likely they could lose. So like I said, Joseph Parker, in my opinion, he is someone on that Dillian White to Andrew Ruiz Jr. type of tier. But I can't even necessarily say that Joseph Parker has a win in his career like an Anthony Joshua, because when he fought Anthony Joshua, in my opinion, I don't think that he threw anywhere near enough. Now, Joseph Parker fans, they'll tell you all in all that the fight was decently competitive. It was competitive in spots, but in terms of the all-around scorecard, the fight, in my opinion, really was not that close. It just is what it is. So the big question now is this: can Joseph Parker, even fighting like this, and I thought that he looked very decently good. One thing I'll give Joseph Parker credit for is this: he looked more defensively responsible in this fight than what he usually does. Because, of course, if you tend to watch Joseph Parker in some of his bigger fights, he does sometimes tend overall to keep his hands down. And sometimes he would take shots, in my opinion, that he does not need to take. And sometimes Joseph Parker, even though he does fight on the back foot, a big weakness that he has is that he does not like to keep his hands up. And if you can back him up against the ropes, sometimes, he moves a little bit too straight back and forward. So he can be caught with certain shots, and a certain amount of people may disagree with me there, but take a look at the knockdown against Derek Chisora in the first fight. Also take a look at how he was knocked down against Dillian White, and there may be even other fighters that I'm not personally remembering at the point in time. But the big question is, can Joseph Parker possibly become a world heavyweight champion once again? I would say that the odds are a little bit against him, just in terms of overall possibly beating a Alexander Usyk or a Tyson Fury or an Anthony Joshua or someone like that. But you never personally know in the heavyweight division. One punch, of course, can change everything. And, of course, Joseph Parker, in my opinion, he is at least one of the top 7 heavyweights in the world. I do think, all in all, that he is very talented. Maybe if he can get a rematch with Dillian White, if Dillian White is able to beat Tyson Fury or lose to him, either way, I think that would be a very decent fight. An Andrew Ruiz Jr. rematch, in my opinion, would be just what the doctor ordered. I personally would love to see that fight. I thought that the first fight was very decently competitive. I would understand if you saw that Andrew Ruiz won the fight. I would understand if you saw that Joseph Parker won the fight. Andy, in my opinion, was more accurate with his punching, but Joseph Parker clearly was more active. So it is what it is. But when it comes down to it, it would be very interesting to see where Joseph Parker comes from here. Once again, I don't personally believe that he's ever going to be on the AJ or Deontay Wilder or Tyson Fury or Alexander Usyk level. But who knows, maybe, just maybe, he could pull out a potential win. But one thing I am going to say about Joseph Parker is this. In my opinion, if I were to make any suggestions to him, certainly be more defensively responsible. Now, he did add on some extra weight here, and perhaps that is a part of the reason why he took extra punches or looked a little bit, I don't want to say lethargic, but looked a little bit slowed in the latter rounds. because I believe that that was some weight that maybe he was not used to before. I cannot necessarily remember, but it did look like maybe he was a little bit tired in the latter rounds. I don't necessarily think that gaining weight, is always necessarily a bad thing for certain boxers, but some boxers may not be able to handle it. But Joseph Parker knows his body better than I do. So all in all, like I said, that's up to him. But when it comes down to it, if Joseph Parker is going to beat some of these bigger heavyweights, and what I mean by that, I'm talking about prolific heavyweights, talented heavyweights, skilled heavyweights, he's going to have to be consistently active. He cannot fight scared like he did in the Anthony Joshua fight. And on top of that, he is going to have to trim up his defense. We'll see all in all what happens. Now, if Dillian Whyte and Joseph Parker were to have a rematch, who would I personally bet on? I would bet on Dillian Whyte, because I think all in all that not only is he more experienced against top-level competition, especially in beating them, but I think that he has a better all-around skill set than that of a Joseph Parker. But there's someone on the same level. So we'll see what happens. Andrew Wiese versus Joseph Parker, in my opinion, that would be a great fight. I think Andrew Wiese, in terms of some fundamentals, you can argue that he's more skilled than Joseph Parker, but Joseph Parker is usually a little bit more active, especially with his feet, because Andrew Wiese, he might be a little bit, better defensively on the inside, but it doesn't really matter if you can't get your punches off unless you're 2 inches in front of your target. And that's basically what Andrew Wiese is. He has cement feet when it comes down to it. And basically, Andrew Wiese Jr., he usually can't get his punches off unless his opponent is right in front of him. So actually, it would be very, very interesting to see who would possibly win that rematch. And whoever were to win that rematch, whether Joseph Parker faces Dillian Whyte or Andrew Wiese next, I think that potentially that could earn him a title shot. So we'll see where Mr. Joseph Parker goes from here. I was thoroughly impressed with him, at least compared to some of his standards within the past few fights of his. But we'll see overall what happens with Mr. Joseph Parker. Like I said, I don't necessarily think that he's on the top 4 echelon, but we'll see overall where he goes. He could potentially earn a title shot, and if he is, maybe able to face Alexander Usyk, maybe even a Tyson Fury. Alexander Usyk, who knows, maybe he may have problems against Joseph Parker because he is speedy, he is strong, and in terms of height and reach, they're probably very, very similar, so that could be a very tough fight for Alexander Usyk. And Tyson Fury, sometimes he does have problems with speedier and smaller guys. So it would be very, very interesting to see where Joseph Parker comes from here. But that's pretty much my whole analysis of Mr. Joseph Parker in this fight. I thought that it was a very good performance by Joseph Parker, and we'll see all in all where he goes from here. But anyways, that's really about it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.